As we begin this morning, I'm going to ask you to do something that I know will make some of you uncomfortable. And if you're watching this later at home, just find somebody else that's nearby. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at the people who are around you. Okay? Seriously, just turn, look, wherever you got to go. Just look at the people around you while they're looking at you. Kind of uncomfortable sometimes, isn't it? What I want you to notice this morning is the variety of people who have gathered to worship in our church today. What do you see as you look? I see a mixture of men and women. I see a variety of ages. I see different body types, some shorter, some taller. I see people who just look happy to be here. And then I see some of you who I think are still mad at me for wearing a UConn shirt last week after we defeated the Illini. I don't know that some of you will ever be able to get over that, but I'll just keep praying. You know, we're not a large church, but we still have some variety in our congregation, and that's a really, really good thing. And you know, it's something that we strive for more of as we continue to grow in the future. And you know, one of the ways that people describe people who are different yet share a common way of thinking and do similar things are to say that they are within their circle. Your circle are the people that you interact with on a regular basis, and you just enjoy being around them. Within our big circle, there, of course, is our inner circle. Those people who we're really close to, maybe it's our family, maybe it's our closest friends, but we have an inner circle. I want you to think about yours this morning. Think about your relational circle and who's in it. Who's in your relational circle? You know, for some of us, our circle is pretty small, and for others of us, it's much larger, and that's okay because we're all different. And when we look at how different the people are who fill our circles, a lot of it, I think, probably depends upon two things. Number one, our stage in life. And number two, where we have chosen to live during our life. If we've lived in a larger urban area, there's probably a lot of diversity. And we're probably seeing people in our circle who don't look like us, who don't think like us, who don't act like us. On the other hand, if we enjoy the space, of living in the country, living in a rural setting for a long, long time, our circle may look a lot like us. People who are with us may look like us, think like us, and act like us. And again, that's okay. We're all different. So if we're all different, then our circles are probably going to be different as well. As you can see, we're starting a new message series today that's entitled Inside Jesus' Circle. And what we're going to be looking at are the people who Jesus included in his, I'm going to call it a unique circle for right now. And how people went from being on the outside to coming to the inside and even becoming friends with Jesus. And you know what? It's the same thing that we can experience in our lives as well. Anybody here really like geometry when you were in high school? Raise your hand, okay? Did you really just love, learning about all those shapes and stuff like that? Well, I need to give you a disclaimer then if you're one of those people who really like geometry, and that is that we know our graphic is not a circle, okay? But we really do think it's the best representation that we could find to visualize the diverse group of people that Jesus interacted with during his earthly ministry. Let me kind of walk you through the process, and our problem. You see, Jesus' circle is very unique. But we wanted to try to visualize it as best we could. So we started with the definition of circle by itself, and here is this. It is a round plane figure whose boundaries, that is the circumference, consist of points equidistant from a fixed point, that is the center. I know if I'd asked you what a circle was, that's exactly what you would have told me, right? But you know what? That just doesn't seem to fit the circle that we see of Jesus in the Bible. So then we considered an ellipse, not an eclipse, that's what happens tomorrow, okay? We're talking about an ellipse, which is defined as a regular oval shape traced by a point moving in a plane so that the sum of its distances from the two other points, that is the foci, is constant. I have no idea what that means. Okay, if you do, that's fantastic, but that's what an ellipse is. And you know what? If we tried to use an ellipse to capture this circle of Jesus, it would really be too neat and clean. Because so many people that Jesus hung around with just didn't fit inside of this consistent thing where everything is equidistant. So we could jump from 2D, which these two examples are, into the 3D world and look at such an option as, okay, let's say inside Jesus' sphere. A sphere is a round, solid figure or its surface with every point on its surface equidistant from its center. Again, not everybody. There's so many different people at so many different levels. There's just no way that we feel like a sphere could really capture the idea of the diversity of people who follow Jesus. So then we considered this one, a dodecahedron. I'm sure all of you know what that is. It's a three-dimensional shape having 12 plane faces, in particular, a regular solid figure with 12 equal pentagonal faces. I knew you would tell me that's the definition. But that just doesn't roll off your tongue, does it? Inside Jesus' I can't even say it, dodecahedron. So I really do think that Nick captured the idea very well. And Jesus' circle was not textbook by any definition. But I think it shows just how different people were a part of Jesus' life and ministry while he was here, and how all of us, no matter who we are, how different we are in so many different areas of our life, we can still be a part of his circle as well. And today what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at how Jesus' circle grew once he began his ministry and people were attracted to him. And here's something that I want you to think about as we start this series today and then we continue it in the weeks to come. That is, what attracted you to Jesus? And how did you become a part of his very unique circle? What attracted you to Jesus and become a part of his circle? As we begin to look at a lot of texts, okay, over the course of the next few weeks, what we need to remember is one thing. The Bible is not a history book, okay? We want to approach it as a science book. We want to approach it as a history book. We want to approach it as a lot of different things. But all it is, okay, 66 books that are a collection of writings that were done over a long, long period of time, done by a lot of different authors, but they all had one shared assignment. And that assignment was led by the Holy Spirit. And the assignment was simply to reveal to us the heart and, to the best of our ability, to understand the mind of God. Can you imagine how hard that would have been for those writers in the Bible to say, hey, here's God's heart, here's God's mind, because God is so far above us and beyond us that we're just grasping to try to figure out who God is. But the assignment was for them to reveal to us the heart and mind of God. We've got to remember that each writer had an audience that they were trying to write to, and in this assignment, they were given the flexibility to arrange their message and communicate it in whatever way they felt best to hit their audience. We really see that, okay, in the books that we're going to be looking at for the next few weeks. In the Gospels, okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all wrote about Jesus' life here on earth, but if you've read them, you know how different they are. And one will say it this way, one will say it that way, one will omit this, one will include this. It's just different. But that's okay. We're different too. And what we need to do is we need to look at all that God has given to us in his revelation of himself so that we can put the pieces together as best we can. You know, it would be like me asking everyone here who was a part of our Easter series to give an account, to write an account of what happened during that series. I'm pretty confident that each one of you would tell a different story. Some of you might even talk about a stained shirt. Some might talk about Sydney wrestling with a live lamb on stage and the lamb leaving as a little present. Some of you would probably even talk about Scott's incredible story of forgiveness that he shared with us last week. Because we're all different, we're going to look at things different and we're going to record different things. And we've got to remember that's exactly what the writers of Scripture did as well. So what I want to do today is to begin looking at what happened when Jesus stepped out of what was really a pretty small circle. It was his family and a few people that lived around him in Capernaum and in Galilee, and he began his public ministry. And today I want to use Mark's gospel today, okay, for a couple of reasons. It shows just how quickly Mark was writing a gospel that just gives us some bullet points, and he lets us see pretty quickly, here's how fast Jesus' ministry grew, as well as the diversity of the people who began following Jesus. If you've got a Bible this morning, okay, most of the rest of the service is just Scripture, okay? I didn't think I could go wrong with that, okay? Mark chapter 1 is where we're going to start today. And if you've got a printed text and you want to just start making some notes, go ahead and do that. If you want to take a Bible out of the pew and start making some notes, I don't care. But let's look at Mark chapter 1. And begin to see how quickly Jesus' ministry grew and how the types of people, and how they were attracted to him. Verse 16 says, one day as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets, and at once they followed him. A little further up the shore, Jesus saw Zebedee's sons, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets. He called them at once, and they also followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. In my mind, I describe it this way. Jesus began filling his circle with some of the good old boys. People that he may have known as he was growing up, people from the area, people like Simon, Andrew, James, and John. They were all experienced and successful fishermen. And they probably had a little bit of religious background, but by no means were any of them spiritual leaders at that time. They knew how to fish. They knew how to preach. They knew how to fish. And 3 of the 4, we're told, had some pretty big issues that Jesus had to help them work through. In fact, Andrew's the only one that seems to be somewhat normal. But keep in mind, Andrew is also the one that we know the least about. Reading on, Mark chapter 1, verse 21. Jesus and his companions, that would be these 4 guys and probably a lot of other people, went to the town of Capernaum. When the Sabbath day came, he went into the synagogue and began to preach. The people were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with what? Real authority. Quite unlike the teachers of the religious law. You see what Jesus is doing here? He went from filling his circle with some people who had maybe a little bit of spiritual background to those who were really seeking more depth and spiritual insights by going to the synagogue where all of these people gathered. And boy, did he get their attention. Because if you keep reading on in Mark chapter 1, what he does is he casts out a demon right there in the synagogue. My guess is that didn't happen every week. And this is what happened then. Mark chapter 1, verse 28. The news about Jesus spread quickly throughout the entire region of Galilee. So already in his circle, there are the good old boys. There are those who had heard countless readings of the Jewish scriptures and countless teachings of the rabbis. But they were all kind of looking at Jesus the same way, which is kind of in wonder and in amazement, thinking about, okay, he casts out a demon. We don't see that every day. He teaches as one who's different. He does things differently. So he was attracting new and different people into his circle. But he doesn't stop there. He keeps going. At least as Mark presents it, there's a whole group of people who are looking for comfort. And they're attracted to Jesus as well. And it begins with Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Jump down with me to Mark chapter 1, verse 29, where it says, after Jesus left the synagogue with James and John, they went to Simon and Andrew's home. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever. They told Jesus about her right away. So he went up to her bedside, took her by the hand, and helped her sit up. Then the fever left her, and she prepared a meal for them. That evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. In fact, the whole town gathered at the door to watch. Now, we're not talking thousands, we're talking dozens. So what did Jesus do? He healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. But because the demons knew who he was, he didn't allow them to speak. The circle's growing pretty fast, isn't it? There's a lot of different types of people in it. Think about how different the people were who were not inside of it, but Jesus invited in. They were rough and tough fishermen. They were spiritual seekers. There were people who needed physical, spiritual, and mental help. And the way, at least that Mark presents it, the start of Jesus' ministry lets us see just how quickly everything grew. In fact, it got to the point in chapter 1, verses 35 and 36, where one day Simon goes out looking for Jesus, and this is what he says to him in verse 37. Everybody's looking for you. But Jesus replied, we got to go to other towns as well and preach to them too. That's why I came. So he traveled throughout the region of Galilee. Okay, keep in mind, Galilee is this whole region, this whole little country up there. And he preached in the synagogues, and he kept casting out demons. Jesus just kept doing that. He healed more people, and even when he healed people, he told them, hey, let's control this for a little bit, okay? Don't share everything that's happened to you. But did they listen? Well, here's one case. In verse 45, the man went who had been healed and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. As a result, large crowds soon surrounded Jesus, and he could not publicly enter a town anywhere. He had to stay in the secluded places. But people from everywhere kept coming to him. Chapter 2, verse 1, when Jesus entered into Capernaum several days later, the news quickly spread that he was back home. Soon the house where he was staying was so packed with visitors, and there was no more room even outside the door. There was just something attractional about Jesus, wasn't there? In fact, at this point in time, if he wanted to limit the size of his circle, there is no way in the world that he would have been able to do so. And that was God's plan all along. His circle was never meant to fit the definition of what a circle really is, because it includes such a vast array of people in the big circle as well as his inner circle. And we see that by a story that Mark tells about someone who Jesus personally invited into his big circle, who then later became a part of his inner circle. Okay, let's read about that in Mark chapter 2, verse 13. Jesus went out to the lakeshore again and taught the crowds that were coming to him. And as he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting in his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Levi got up and followed him. Have you ever thought about how such a strategic and well-planned move this was on Jesus' part? Involving Matthew into the circle. Why was it such a big deal? Because I'm pretty sure that Matthew, Andrew, Peter, James, and John would have never been with Matthew in a small circle. You see, Matthew had 2 strikes against him when he walked into that first meeting, of Jesus' closest followers. Number 1, he was a Jew who was collecting taxes for the Romans. Raise your hand if you love paying taxes this time of year, okay? I see no hands. They didn't like it back then either. And consider this, more than likely, Matthew had I'm going to go on a limb here, maybe he had some encounters with James and John and Andrew and Simon about paying taxes. Because you see, Matthew was the one stationed on the beach, so that when all the fishermen came in, they had to pay him. A part of me can't help but wonder, knowing James and John like we do, if there wasn't a point in time when they were sitting in a meeting with Jesus and the two of them were saying, Jesus, call down fire on them, please, on Matthew. Please, just burn him up. Just burn him up. By inviting Matthew into his circle, Jesus introduced some tension into the group. But at the same time, what he showed was how people can be vastly different and still be a part of the same group and accomplish something very great. Including Matthew, no doubt had something else to do that would cause more tension within the circle, especially those who were on the outside wanting to come in. Matthew helped bring a more diverse group, an even more diverse group of people into Jesus' circle. Because look at what Matthew does right after he begins to follow Jesus. Verse 15 of chapter 2. Levi invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax and other disreputable sinners. Note the parenthesis. There were many people of this kind amongst Jesus' followers. And there were some people who had a hard time following that or had a hard time accepting that. When the teachers of the religious law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with tax collectors and other sinners, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with such scum? I love the New Living Translation's word there. When Jesus heard this, he told them, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I've come to call not those who think that they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Can you begin to sense what's going on inside of Jesus' circle at this point in time? And is there somebody that we have seen that has been brought into that group that we can begin to relate to? Now, maybe the NLT goes a little overboard when they refers to Matthew's friends as scum, okay? I looked at the original word. It's not a great translation. But you know what? What they do is they do capture the idea of what Mark is trying to convey about how people felt towards Matthew and his friends. They were looked down upon. Because they were the ones who took your hard-earned money and gave it to a government that you didn't like. Inside Jesus' circle were a lot of people who others looked down on. And if you go by a strict definition of a circle being equidistant from its center point, you know what? There is just no way to get all of these different people to fit in this nice little round object, whether it be 2D or 3D. What we're going to see in the weeks to come is this circle just kept getting more and more diverse. And there's got to come a point in time when we acknowledge that only the Son of God, really, only the Son of God could take such a diverse group of people and bring them together and unite them over one main mission. Think about the application for us today. We might be some of the good old boys and girls. A little bit of background in spiritual things, but for the most part, we just go do something else, and we come to church, and that then maybe will make us a spiritual seeker, that we want to learn more. Maybe what attracts us to Jesus is the fact that we find comfort in him. We find healing. We believe that he's capable of doing all those things, so we want to be close to him. But my guess is this: most of us are a part of Jesus' circle. We're inside that circle because we, like Matthew, know we're scum. We know we're sinners. And we see in Jesus the only option of forgiveness that's available to mankind. Here's something that we all have in common, no matter who we are or how we think. And it's really Matthew, I think, who tells us what it was that attracted all of these different types of people. And maybe it's the same thing that attracts us today. Matthew chapter 9, verse 36 says this. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. He had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus looks at us and he says, I want you to be a part of my circle. And I will show you more compassion than anybody else can ever do, and more compassion that you can even begin to understand. And you know what? If you're confused and feeling helpless, I'll guide you. Jesus just wants us to step inside his circle. And the good news, there's so many layers of the gospel, so many layers of good news. The good news is whoever we are, wherever we are spiritually, we can be included in that circle. My prayer today is that's where you want to be. My prayer is that nobody wants to stay on the outside looking in. But we want to become a part of not just the big circle, but his inner circle as well. Look around a room, excuse me. Look around the room again. And I want you to look at the people who are here. If you're at home, look at whoever you can find. Look around the people and notice how different we are. And I want you to think about how gracious God is that we're in this little circle. It's a part of a bigger circle. It's a part of a bigger circle. It's a part of a bigger circle of Jesus. As followers of Jesus, we're a part of an enormous group of people who throughout the ages have just looked to Jesus and said, that's who I'm going to follow. Just being inside Jesus' circle is one thing, but being a part of the inner circle is another. And here's some good news. We can do that as well. We can move from being on the inside of the big part. We can come to become friends of Jesus. And here's how that happens. John chapter 15, verses 14 and 15 says this. This is Jesus talking. He says, you're my friends. You're not just in my circle. You're my friend if you do what I command. And I no longer call you slaves because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends since I have told you everything the Father told me. Do you find any comfort at all in knowing that not only can we be in part of Jesus' big circle of people with all this diversity, we can become one of his closest friends? We can be the biggest sinner, the most despised person who everybody else in the world looks down on. But Jesus says, hey, I want you to be my friend. And all it takes is for us to do what he says. And what does he say to do? In this passage in Matthew, it says that, Jesus says, hey, there are a couple things that I really want you to do. One is to love God. And the second is love one another. Not this whole great big long list of things we have to check off. Just, do we love one another? Can we love people who are even in our circle at this church and in other churches who follow Christ and say, you know what? I'm okay if they're different than I am. I'm okay if they don't think like I do on this or that. I just love them. If you're willing to do those things, you can become very comfortable inside Jesus' circle. And when you get in there, what you find out is that there are other things that he asks us to do. They're not difficult. Sometimes they're a little harder, but they're not impossible. But what they do is they just make life better. And so if you're someone who maybe has just walked into the inside or you're still on the outside looking in, let me encourage you to do this. Come for the next few weeks, okay? Come into this circle called South Fork Church. And let's find out together just how great and rewarding and fantastic it can feel to be a part of God's very, very unique shaped